Hi there, my name is Amelia O'Neill, and today I'm going to be explaining the concepts of Type 1 and Type 2 error in scientific research. What are Type 1 and Type 2 errors? Well, both concepts refer to errors of judgment made by researchers with respect to their assumptions around the null hypothesis within a research study. The null hypothesis, although it isn't always specifically stated, refers to the exact opposite of the research hypothesis. The null hypothesis suggests that there is no relationship between the variables being tested and that any observed difference was due to chance. For example, if our research hypothesis is that the children in grade 2B will be happy to receive a banana flavoured ice cream, the null hypothesis would be that the children in grade 2B will not be happy to receive a banana flavoured ice cream. Type 1 error is when researchers reject the null hypothesis even though it is correct. This is also known as a false positive. When measuring the probability of a type 1 error, we are introduced to a new symbol called alpha. The researcher chooses an alpha value prior to commencing the study. An alpha of 0.05 represents a 5% chance of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. The lower the alpha value, the lower the risk of rejecting the null hypothesis incorrectly. Following on from our banana ice cream analogy we used previously, here is an example of type 1 error. You give the class a banana ice cream each, assuming they will be happy to receive it, rejecting the null hypothesis, when in fact the null hypothesis was true and the children are unhappy to have received the ice cream. Type 2 error occurs when the null hypothesis is not rejected but it is false, i.e. you accept a false null hypothesis. Type 2 error is also referred to as a false negative. The probability of type 2 error is represented with the symbol beta. Type 2 error relates to a new concept called power, which is the probability of correctly rejecting the null hypothesis and avoiding a type 2 error. Power is equivalent to 1 minus beta, and the greater the power, the lower type 2 error probability. An example of type 2 error, leading on from our banana ice cream analogy, would be that you incorrectly accept the null hypothesis, assuming that the children in class 2B will not be happy to receive a banana ice cream, and therefore you don't give them any. The children, much to your surprise, are unhappy because they do in fact like banana ice cream and would have been very happy to have received one. You have incorrectly accepted the null hypothesis, and the children are sad they missed out. So how do researchers avoid type 1 and type 2 error? To minimise the probability of getting a false positive or type 1 error, researchers can minimise the significance level of a hypothesis test. For example, decreasing the significance level from 0.05 to 0.01. This will reduce the probability of incorrectly rejecting the null hypothesis from 5% down to 1%. To limit the probability of a type 2 error, researchers can increase the power of a test. To increase power, they can either 1. Increase the sample size, or 2. Increase the significance level. An example of this would be increasing the significance level from 0.05 to 0.10, which would imply a higher probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. It should be noted, however, that the larger probability of rejecting the null hypothesis decreases the probability of committing a type 2 error while simultaneously increasing the probability of committing a type 1 error. Because of this inverse relationship, researchers should always assess the impact of type 1 and 2 errors prior to setting a significance level for the study. In summary, type 1, also known as a false positive error, is when researchers reject the null hypothesis even though it is true, and this can be minimised by decreasing significance levels of the study. Type 2 error, also known as false negative, is when you incorrectly accept a false null hypothesis, and this can be minimised by increasing the power of the study. I hope this video has been very informative and that you now have a better understanding of type 1 and type 2 error.